Madam President, before he yields the floor, I want to commend my colleague from Connecticut in terms particularly, and I'm going to go into some of the history with respect to this so-called zero tolerance, policy, because I think when you look back over history, there is a very big gap between the past pledges of zero tolerance for sexual assault and the realities of what we have seen. And I think that's one of the key points that the senator from Connecticut has made, among many others, and I thank him for it. It was a very valuable presentation. Madam President, I also want to commend the President of the Senate for her extraordinary work on this. Again and again, she has outlined what I think is very constructive, and that is the areas where there is common ground here, common ground to try to address an issue that, as I just went through with Senator Blumenthal, we've heard past pledges about and that hasn't really come to be. And the President of the Senate's done very fine work on this. Senator Gillibrand, Senator McCaskill, Senator Ayotte, I know the best, but a whole host of senators have been interested in this. And I also see my friend from Rhode Island here, Senator Reed. He and Senator Levin have been very interested in this issue over the years. So there's been plenty of good work here. And I think the question, really now is how are we going to make a fundamental break for policies that over the last couple of decades simply have not worked. I mean, you go back to the tailhook scandal. This was in 1991 over the course of a 4-day conference in Las Vegas. More than 100 Naval and Marine Corps aviation officers sexually assaulted 90 victims. We watched the Secretary of the Navy resign after tailhook. His replacement said, and I quote, "Sexual harassment will not be tolerated, and that those who don't get the message will be driven from our ranks." Then there was the Aberdeen debacle 5 years later. 5 years after, Madam President, we were told that this would not be tolerated. 5 years later, you have the Aberdeen debacle. Army Secretary Togo West delivered remarks to the Senate Armed Services Committee titled, "There's a problem and we mean to fix it." Once again, years go by and you have another such problem, and that was the 2003 scandal at the Air Force Academy, where 19% of women cadets reported having been sexually assaulted and 7% reported being the victim of rape or attempted rape. The Air Force Secretary told Congress, and I quote, "We will not tolerate in our Air Force nor in our Academy those who sexually assault others, those who would fail to act to prevent assaults." So again, we heard, and certainly I'm not here to doubt the sincerity of those who made those comments, but yet the pattern just continues. You have a horrible, horrible set of sexual, assaults, not just one, but multiple ones. You have these pledges for zero tolerance, and yet you just have one event after another. And after the 2003 scandal, again, the pledges of zero tolerance, you had the Joint Base San Antonio-Lackland scandal, where some 30 training instructors were accused of offenses ranging from improper relationships with trainees to sexual assault and rape. In response, the Secretary of Defense said, as so many of his predecessors in the military said, and I will quote, "The command structure from the chairman on down have made very clear to the leadership in this department that this is intolerable and it has to be dealt with. We have absolutely no tolerance for any form of sexual assault," unquote. So the pattern through all of these instances, Madam President, is zero tolerance. Quote, "We will fix this." And these comments, as I say, I don't question the sincerity of those who made them. These were officials in the military who who have served their country with great distinction and great valor, but the bottom line is the bottom line. When they said there would be zero tolerance, somehow those policies didn't actually work as it related to the real life for those who wear the uniform of the United States. So today, Madam President, the military officer in charge of sexual abuse education at Fort Hood is under investigation for running a prostitution ring. 2 Navy football players await trial in a military court on charges of sexual assault. And today, a West Point sergeant stands accused of secretly videotaping female cadets in the showers. So it seems to me that because of the good work of so many here, and I cited the President of the Senate, Senator Reid, who is managing the bill at this point, Senator Gillibrand, Senator McCaskill. I think we're now in a position to finally make some significant changes and turn these past pledges of zero tolerance into a new reality that really ensures that those who wear the uniform of the United States do have a new measure of protection from sexual assault. So in effect, it's a new zero tolerance policy, Madam President, a new policy that says zero tolerance for promises that go unfulfilled, zero tolerance for a culture in which these assaults are treated as something less than the violent crimes they are, zero tolerance for a system that continues to fail so many. Now, the Pentagon estimates that in 2012, some 26,000 service members experienced sexual assault. And some, I know, have looked at this issue as sort of a glorified hazing kind of matter, boys being boys, a discipline issue. But I think Senator Fisher, one of our colleagues who has come to the Senate most recently, has been correct to point out this is not a gender issue. This is a violence issue. And it's a violence issue because sexual assault, it's called assault for a reason. It is assault. We're talking about a violent crime that involves control and domination. And I think it's also worth noting that somewhere in the vicinity of close to half of military assault victims are men. In fact, the Department of Defense estimates that 14,000 of those 26,000 victims last year were men. So, Madam President, I know colleagues are waiting to speak, and I would simply wrap up by way of saying that I think the the committee bill, takes some constructive steps in the right direction. I'd like to see it go further. It's why I've joined a bipartisan group of colleagues to support Senator Gillibrand's legislation that would remove the decision to prosecute from the chain of command and give it to experienced, impartial military lawyers. And suffice it to say, we are going to have to come to grips, colleagues, with this question of assault, and particularly sexual assault, in a variety of forms. This is not the place to discuss it, Madam President, but yesterday Senator Cornyn and I and Senator Klobuchar introduced a fresh approach to dealing with sex trafficking, which is also sexual assault. So there will be an opportunity to discuss that bipartisan bill in the future. But I know colleagues are waiting. This is the time. This is the time to close the gap, Madam President, between all of those unfulfilled promises about how there'd be zero tolerance for sexual assault and a new reality that affords a new measure of protection from sexual assault for those who wear the uniform of the United States. That's the opportunity we have in the Senate today. That's the opportunity we have to achieve that goal in a bipartisan manner. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.